Pierre Lellouche has been French Minister for European Affairs since June 2009. Today, his focus includes foreign policy, the financial crisis and the Turkish candidacy to join the EU. He spoke to Euronews about the latest developments in French foreign and EU policy.
Bienvenue sur Euronews.
Bienvenue au Quai d'Orsay surtout.
It's nearly the second anniversary of the August 2008 Russian-Georgian conflict. France and President Sarkozy played a big part in ending the hostilities as fast as possible. What are France's relations with these two protagonists today, seeing as the situation in South Ossetia and in Abkhazia seemed deadlocked?
We regret that the situation is deadlocked. We remain friends with Georgia, and we are the only foreign presence there.
The
only non-Russian, non-Georgian element in Georgia is European troops. President Saakashvili recently came to Paris, and we will soon start negotiating an association agreement between Georgia and the EU. As far as Abkhazia and South Ossetia go, they are part of Georgian territory. There you have it. The so-called independence of these territories, locally declared and recognized by Russia, for us, it has no legal jurisdiction. Furthermore, I think it is a mistake to give a false sovereignty to territories which are in fact enclaves within a sovereign country. It creates precedents which benefit no one, and some people in Moscow understand that.
France, as a co-president of the Minsk group, is especially concerned in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Do you think the partnership of France, Russia and the US can resolve this issue, which has been stalled for years?
Well, it's mainly been stalled by internal politics. And we encourage the press and local politicians, on one hand the Turkish side, and on the other the Armenian side. We very much supported President Gül's football diplomacy with Armenia. We saw there was an agreement. Then, sadly, the agreement was not ratified. We very much want these countries to reach a solution through negotiations. It's the same for Azerbaijan, which has a real economic potential. They must admit there are refugees, and they must find solutions.
And can Turkey help resolve this situation?
I have been asking them to open the land frontier for a long time. You know that the air frontier is open, and the Turks have everything to gain by opening the border with Armenia, by not cutting this country off. So I hope that Turkey will do this, but of course it's difficult when many refugees remain in Azerbaijan and they have religious and ethnic affinities with them.
At the last EU-Russia summit, the issue of abolishing visas was discussed. What would be the advantage of this for EU citizens? What's the outlook for this project? And what might be the stumbling blocks?
Listen, we consider the Cold War finished. Russia is a friendly country. Voila. If you use visas, they have to go both ways. We have absolutely nothing against the idea of Russians entering the EU without visas, on condition, of course, that EU citizens can enter Russia without visas.
Is that not the case?
Well, I think that's exactly where we need to make progress.
A policy of improving ties between Moscow and Washington seems well underway, despite recent glitches. Isn't there a risk of the EU being marginalised if that continues?
I'll quote you one of Kissinger's favourite sayings from when he was my professor. When the Russians and Americans get along, Europeans are afraid. And when the Russians and the Americans disagree, Europeans are afraid. Russia and Europe have convergent strategic interests: terrorism, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So we have to work together, and we are working together on terrorism in Afghanistan, for example. Every month sees real cooperation between Russia, Europe, and the US and NATO. But especially Russia and Europe, to smooth out conflicts from a bygone age and move on to other things.
You've just come back from Brussels, where the EU's new diplomatic service is being constructed around Catherine Ashton. In Paris, they're saying that there's an influence crisis in the French diplomatic service. Do you think there's a link?
Listen, that's got nothing to do with it. Firstly, I haven't heard anything about an influence crisis, and it couldn't have anything to do with the European diplomatic project, which we here in France have very much supported. We're still right at the beginning of that project. By the autumn, we will have leading diplomats in place, plus the delegations, which already exist, EU embassies, in fact. I think it will take 2 to 3 years before the system really beds in and finds its niche, develops relationships with embassies of member states, who will still maintain their own diplomatic networks.
What's your vision of the current situation in Europe post-Lisbon Treaty and post the Greek euro crisis? And could this crisis have consequences on the EU's position in the world?
The crisis is having a major effect, absolutely everywhere on the planet. It has changed the balance. What worries me is the growth rate in Europe. At 1%, it's very low, 12 times lower than in China. So we have a problem with growth and with adapting our economic model to an increasingly competitive world. I would say that this is an enormous challenge. The global economic crisis that has lasted 2 years already, but in the face of that, a union of 27 countries, with elections in these member states, with constant changes of governments. Well, overall, I would say that the European family remains united.